Chapter 12. Imogen wasn't normally vain about her appearance. Well, that wasn't strictly true. She appreciated her thick, wavy hair and considered herself relatively pretty, but she didn't dwell on it and thought that there was much more to her than how she looked. While she was growing up in New Jersey, she kept up with the fashion trends and made sure her hair and nails were done regularly. However, since moving to Vermont, it had been freeing to focus less on her appearance and more on her work with Fortune and her plans for the equine sanctuary. There were days that she didn't leave the farm, simply pulling coveralls over her pajamas to perform farm chores. With the exception of her girls' nights with Harper and Bailey, she had become a bit of a homebody. Dinner out with Gabe was incredibly exciting, especially after their estrangement. She'd spent the last hour exfoliating, shaving, and primping for the evening. She'd even taken the time to straighten her hair and apply a light layer of makeup. She came into the kitchen with a twirl, laughing at her aunt's wolf whistle. It felt nice to have something to look forward to. Imogen had learned to avoid skirts and dresses in the cold. Who wanted to bare their legs when the temperature was dropping to below 10 degrees Fahrenheit this evening? No, instead she wore a cream-colored wool turtleneck with straight-leg jeans rolled at the cuff over brown winter boots. Cute, practical, and perfect for a date with the handsomest man in town. She pulled out her phone to check the time when there was a knock. Cookie raced out of her dog bed and ran for the front door, her whole body wagging from side to side like she was doing the lambada. Joe and Imogen laughed, and Imogen shooed her pup aside with her body to open it for her date. Gabe was greeted by his redhead slamming bodily into him as her errant dog shoved her out of the way so she could greet him herself. "Hi, Cookie, you good girl," he greeted. He held Imogen tightly against his side while he reached an arm down, trying to keep the dog from jumping in her excitement. "I missed you too, sweetheart." Cookie was in her glory, slobbering all over his face as they all laughed. Imogen reluctantly stepped back out of his arms to grab her thick parka. It allowed Gabe and his canine girlfriend to have a little space to be reunited. It was hard to feel jealousy. It was adorable how much they loved each other. Finally, Gabe stood and brushed himself of fur and hair. Joe walked up to hand him a tissue to wipe off the excess and give him a pat on the cheek. He grinned down at the older woman. They had a strong bond, living as neighbors over the last few years, and enjoyed each other's company often. "Hi, Joe. How's my best girl?" He grinned as she play-swatted at him. "You have these two women wrapped around your finger. You don't need to add another Romeo," Joe admonished. Gabe simply winked at her in response. Imogen enjoyed watching them interact. This was the man that she'd fallen in love with. She knew logically that the cold, calculated man was in there somewhere, waiting to come out again. However, she realized she had to accept them both to truly love the man in front of her. The man in question turned his attention to her, and she felt herself blushing under his clearly appreciative gaze. She closed the distance, going in for another hug. She couldn't get enough after their distance the last few days. It was one thing to not see him because of work, but quite another when they were fighting. She didn't like it at all. Besides, Gabe gave the most wonderful hugs. She felt completely enveloped and safe in them. Seeing him in action the other night, she did have to appreciate how protective he was of her. "Hey, Jersey, are you ready?" "I've been ready, just waiting for your fans to move aside," she quipped. Gabe smiled softly and directed her ahead of him to the door with a gentle hand on her lower back and closed it behind them. On the porch, he tucked her arm into his and led her to the passenger side of the pickup truck. As they approached, Imogen went to open the door, but he twirled her around and lightly pinned her against it, his frame leaning over her so he could greet her with a soft kiss. She melted into the vehicle and welcomed it fervently. Now that was a great start. Imogen reached her arms up around his neck and increased the intensity, showing him just how much she had missed him. When they were breathless, he let her go. "We'll miss our reservation." Neither of them seemed in a rush to leave, though. They were too content to hold each other once again. "Party pooper," she murmured, releasing her hold on him and swung into the truck. He leaned in to adjust her seatbelt and tickled her, making her squeal. Now he left too, and with a little hop in his step, came around to the driver's side and prepared to take his redhead to a romantic meal. The drive was quiet. Both Imogen and Gabe were delighted to be in each other's company. He reached over the console and grabbed her hand in his, steering with his left down the winding roads. When they came into Manchester Village, he pulled into a parking lot she'd never seen before. The restaurant was small but lovely, and when they approached the double doors, she looked at him. "French?" He winked at her and swung the door open. "I don't think you've been here before. I thought it would be a nice treat." "I love French food." "Me too," he admitted. "This place is pretty great. The owners are from France, so it's as close as we'll get to authentic without getting on a plane." "It sounds amazing." Imogen and Gabe followed the maitre d' to their table, where the latter put a napkin in her lap with a flourish. As Gabe waved the man away and poured their sparkling water himself, she admitted, "Having a baguette in Paris is on my bucket list." Gabe was amused. "Just a baguette?" She added a piece of lemon to her water and took a sip. "No, there would be wine too, obviously." "Obviously," Gabe said. "And cheese, of course." "It wouldn't be a trip to France without cheese," Gabe agreed. They perused the menu and decided to order the mussels and escargot, Parmesan-crusted halibut, duck confit, and cream puffs for dessert. It was a lot of food, but they both wanted to try a little of everything. While their server took away the appetizers, wow, Imogen was practically in love with the garlic butter sauce on the escargot. She leaned back in her chair. Gabe had been quieter than normal, but she was glad to see, although he still had the bags under his eyes, he seemed more relaxed. He clearly hadn't been sleeping well. Imogen wanted to avoid any triggering conversation, so tried to keep things light. She laughed as she told him the story of how Fortune had spooked and bolted, narrowly missing her not once, but twice. Gabe frowned, not finding the story funny at all. "Imogen, that's not even remotely funny. You could have been seriously hurt." Or worse, he hated that he could have come home to find her unconscious on the ground. For her part, Imogen just shrugged, unbothered. She wasn't stupid. She knew Fortune had been on edge. If he'd wanted to hurt her, he would have. Yet, he didn't. Maybe it was stupid to trust a prey animal, but she knew in her gut he'd never hurt her intentionally. "I know, but I'm fine." He didn't like the idea of her working with the horse when he wasn't around. If she'd been hurt, no one would have known for hours. By then, she could have bled out or frozen to death. He said as much, but she waved him off. "I get it. I know he's unpredictable, but I'm fine, Gabe. Honestly. He was overly nervous, so I was paying close attention to his cues. It was just bad timing that the door slammed and it spooked him." "The door slammed?" His horses weren't bothered much by loud noises, but the thoroughbred was still new. He hadn't shown any propensity for spooking until now. It was quite unlike him. "Yeah." She took a sip of her wine. Wow, French wines are really good, she thought. She savored it on her tongue for a moment, enjoying the tingle. "It was weird. Anita came out, I guess she saw my car, and the wind must have slammed the door. Fortune freaked out, and it was just bad timing that I was next to him." Bad timing for sure, he thought. Lopez wasn't familiar with horses, so she couldn't have known, but still, he'd have a talk with her about barn safety. He decided he had to sit her down and see what her next steps were. Having a guest for a few days was one thing, but she showed no signs of moving on. "I'm glad you're okay. I guess if I asked you not to work with him while I wasn't there, you'd laugh in my face?" She grinned. "I'm not sure laughing would be my reaction, but no, I can't promise that. After all, I'm going to be helping out with the evening feeds for you for a few days. I'll come over after I'm done at my place. I think you've been working too hard." Gabe couldn't deny it. Between his long hours and his restless nights, he was burning the candle at both ends. He was on the edge, and he hated it. Perhaps he could convince Imogen to take a little vacation with him somewhere, just for the weekend. Actually, as soon as Lopez left, he was going to make it a surprise. Imogen loved surprises, and it would give him something to look forward to. "You don't have to help, but I do appreciate it. The boys have missed you the last week." He included himself in that reference, something that didn't go unnoticed. She'd gotten pretty good about reading the things he didn't say. "Well, I missed the boys, too," Imogen admitted. "More than I can say. I don't like not talking to you for so long." Even one day without hearing his voice was too many, she decided. It felt like forever, Jersey. Gabe didn't know what he should have done differently. He felt like he was between a rock and a hard place, between his past and his future. He was torn between loyalty to an old squad member and loyalty to his new girlfriend. He hated it. I am sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. She reached a hand to him over the table. He ignored it and instead reached to drag her chair next to his, the legs scraping against the carpet as she squealed in surprise. She'd been too far away from him for too long. Imogen giggled but melted into him when he wrapped an arm around her. The other diners glanced over and smiled at the two lovebirds. They ate their entree seated closely together, their knees touching, and tried bites off each other's plates. Imogen drank his closeness. In such a short time since they'd been together, he'd become someone she didn't want to live without. I know. She heaved a deep sigh. We can't change the past, and I know you were trying to protect me. I just didn't like how you went about it. That was fair. He nodded, his chin resting gently on her hair. He leaned back to make room for the waiter with their dessert. Pressing a small kiss to the top of her head, he said, I'm not the best with words. I never have been. My reaction was instinctive, and I didn't know what the situation was. Thank you for taking yourself out of the equation so I could figure it out and keep you safe. She said nothing, just opened her mouth silently, asking for him to give her a slice of the scrumptious dessert. He laughed as she'd intended. He was a lucky man to have found her. Gabe hated the idea of spending another night apart. His dreams seemed to worsen when she wasn't there. But he didn't want her near that whole situation with Lopez. While his old buddy wasn't a danger to her per se, he didn't want to put Imogen in another situation where he'd have to push her away because he couldn't tell her everything. It wasn't his story to tell, and he had to respect it, even if he hated it. They found the willpower to finish dessert, cuddling and talking quietly. This was the best date she'd ever had in her life. Despite the fact that she could barely breathe with how full she was so happy. Imogen never wanted the night to end, but sooner than she liked, he was driving her home. When Gabe walked her to her door, she enjoyed their long, lingering goodbye. Finally, he had to leave and whisper that he'd see her tomorrow. She couldn't wait.